Welcome to everyone joining us for this month's ECR Wednesday webinar hosted by eLife, a series that aims to give early career researchers a platform to discuss issues important to you and your research career. My name's Emma. I work for the eLife Features team, and today we're discussing the push for mobility. The webinar will begin with the panelists sharing their stories. Then, in the second half of the webinar, we'll be putting your questions to them. To ask a question, you can type in the question box on the GoToWebinar Functions panel, or you can tweet us, we are eLife_careers, using the hashtag ECR Wednesday. Please also join us on Twitter immediately after the webinar, where we'll be continuing the discussion under the ECR Wednesday hashtag. Finally, I'd just like to let you know that we are recording the webinar and will make it available on your YouTube in the near future. Now I'll pass over to Jeanne to introduce herself and the panelists.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Today's webinar is part of our series on achieving independence, and today's topic is on the push for mobility. So we'll be talking about international mobility, so international moves in the scientific career and the advantages and disadvantages and some of the challenges associated with that. So the webinar is actually co-hosted by two organizations with confusingly similar names. One is EU Life, which is a European organization that brings together top institutes in the life sciences in Europe and aims to promote research excellence. It's actually a voice for research in European policy, so sort of a policy advocate. And then the other is eLife, which is the academic journal. It was founded at the end of 2012 with support from HHMI, the Wellcome Trust, and the Max Planck Institute. And really, from the beginning, the idea was to use publishing to change the way, to also be sort of a force for change in the way that we do science and the way that we interact as a scientific community and the way we have our motivations and our incentives. So really to use publishing as a force for change in our scientific endeavor. And so he had this quote, to encourage and recognize the most responsible behaviors in science. So one thing was that it's an open access journal, but also that the aim is not to publish high impact work, but to publish high quality work irrespective of sort of the perceived classical impact. And so from the beginning, it was clear that to encourage change in science, it was important to engage with early career scientists. And so right from the beginning of the eLife project, eLife brought together a panel of the so-called Early Career Advisory Group, which I'm a member of, and that's why I'm chairing this session. And so we're a group of full-time scientists, so PhD students, postdocs, and junior faculty from all over the world and across the disciplines in the life sciences, across the life sciences. And we're really there as a sounding board to give our ideas about some of the challenges that we face. And so the idea for having this webinar series came out of some of our discussions and sort of to be a sounding board for some of the ideas that eLife is doing and moving forward with. So I'm Sharon Salja. I'm a bacterial cell biologist at the University of Oxford and at the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Institute in Thailand. And I'm particularly interested, and I was keen to volunteer to chair this particular webinar. So I've personally moved 5 times internationally, actually intercontinentally in the last 10 years. So I've done a lot of, I'm good at packing bags, I'm good at shipping companies, and I'm also aware of the advantages for a scientific career and also some of the challenges and difficulties associated with moving around frequently and trying to combine that with a personal life. So the moves have been driven both by my own career and that of my husband, and I think that's probably not unusual these days. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what the panelists have to say on this topic and hearing some of their experiences and thoughts. And also, I really want to hear the participation of the speakers who are joining us on the webinar. And so both while the speakers are speaking and throughout, please do get involved and send us your questions and your thoughts and experiences. So I'm going to introduce the speakers in a moment. I just tell you a little bit the format today. So each of the speakers are going to spend about 5 minutes talking about their experiences and their views on this topic. And then we're going to open it up to questions from everybody listening. And so I think there are 2 ways to do that. I'm not sure it says on the next slide how to do that. And Emma introduced that. You can type into the webinar box or you can go on Twitter, and we'll have people who are taking those questions and sending them through to us. So first of all, let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. So the first person who's going to speak is going to be Francesca. So Francesca Spagnoli is a group leader at the Max Delbrück Center for Molecular Medicine in Germany.
Hi. So hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. So first of all, thanks Jan and the organizers of the webinar for the invitation and for the introduction. I just start with few words about myself and my research path, and then I want to share with you a bit about my personal experience in mobility. So as Jan said, my name is Francesca Spagnoli. I'm a group leader at the MDC Max Delbrück Center in Berlin, in Germany. And the focus of my lab is on organogenesis and stem cell biology. So initially I trained as a medical doctor in Italy, which is my home country. And then during my studies, I really became fascinated in biomedical research much more than in clinical work. So after my MD degree, I decided to undertake a research career and to go on with a PhD. And I did a PhD in genetics at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, so in France, and that was my first move. And then basically after that, I never stopped moving for my work and to advance my career. So, and the motivation basically at the time was, but it still is, to search for and to take basically the best opportunities available in terms of labs, of host labs, and then institute. And this is for learning. Basically, this was during my training, during my PhD and during my postdoc, and then afterwards also to start my group. So to go back to my career, basically after my PhD in France, I then decided to move to the US for my postdoc. I did a postdoc at the Rockefeller University in New York. And that's a great place basically where to do science in general. And it was of course a great place, was what motivated my choice. It was mostly my research, my scientific interest, and I thought it was really the place where I wanted to develop my ideas. But beside the lab, in general, Rockefeller is also a great place, a great institution, because it's the place where basically you would meet fantastic scientists, and that would become your peers, your colleague, and it's an opportunity where basically you can start building where I started building my own network. And of course then New York was also another great city to live after Paris. So then afterwards, I decided, when I decided that it was the time for me to move into the job market, I was looking for group leader position, basically, and I applied to various institutes. Mostly, I focused my search in Europe and few places in the US. And basically, the rationale at the time, it was my husband and I, we are both Europeans. So we thought that that was the right time to move back, either to try to move back to Europe or to stay in the US. So I had the best offer here in Berlin at the MDC, and I thought also that the institute was really the right place, a good scientific environment for my science and to start my lab. And research funding is also very good in Germany. So again, it was the best opportunity basically for my science at the time when I started my group, when I wanted to start my group. And also from a personal perspective, Berlin, it was a good place, a good city to live, to move in, and it was also a good place for my husband at the professional level. So this is basically, very briefly, what was my experience. And basically, just to wrap up what I personally value in mobility, I think in summary, an experience abroad is exciting for anybody at the personal level, at the scientific level, and career advice is basically maybe the best pieces of advice that I can give to anybody. So first of all, going to a lab, spending time in labs where excellent science is done, is performed, is a useful step in the career of any successful scientist, is the quickest way basically to develop new ideas, to learn new approaches, new technology. But also, as I mentioned before, referring to my own experience, I think is working in various places, in different labs, different institutes, is not only, it does not only tremendously increase your level of science, but it's also an easy way to again start building a network connection. And I believe that this is particularly important in general, but in particular nowadays, because science is more and more interdisciplinary, and is really based on, often is based on collaborations across countries, across cultures. So basically, having an experience in mobility, having experienced mobility, it prepares a scientist, it facilitates anybody, first of all, to access to this type of interactions, to exchanges, to collaborations, but also it facilitates basically communication. So just to conclude, I think the best is not to get stuck, not to be in the comfort zone, but just to go out and try to go to the best place for your science, basically, out there. And I stop here, and I'll talk to you. I mean, if you have questions, of course, later on, I'm happy to answer them.
That's great. Thank you so much, Francesca. And I think our next speaker is going to be Verena. So Verena Refresh is working at the Center for Genomic Regulation in Barcelona. So over to you, Verena.
Hello, nice talking to you, and thanks a lot for the invitations to speak with all the panelists here, and thanks for your introduction. So yes, so I'm a group leader at the Center of Genomic Regulation here in Barcelona, Spain, since very recently. So I just joined in September 2016, so I'm very junior PI since a couple of months. So I guess in comparison to the other panelists, I'm the one who moved much less during her career. So I was born and grew up in Austria, and I also studied in Austria. I studied physics. I was maybe one of the persons who liked to ask questions all the time. I was keen on mathematics and physics, and I started to study physics because it's also a very basic science, and it might offer me a very versatile approach to different disciplines still. And this is also an experience I have, and the reason why I chose the university early on was already because that university offered an interdisciplinary branch of science combining biology and physics. So this was very unique in Austria at that time. So I went there and got a co-education in physics and biophysics. I stayed then for my doctoral thesis at the university because there was really an excellent lab that I enjoyed a lot to be in, working in experimental biophysics and single molecule imaging. And I was really very interested at that time, having the capability to visualize in living cells, single molecules, single proteins, lipids, and really learn this technique and acquire it to tackle biological questions. So for me, this was just a perfect match because it was a good lab, and it fulfilled my expectations to develop into that field. So I did my PhD in biophysics. Still at that point, I was thinking for myself, I was missing a little bit. I didn't want to stick to physics and experimental biophysics completely, but I really wanted to tackle cell biological questions. So I was actually searching for a lab more cell and developmental biology related, where I could really transfer my knowledge from physics into more biological applications. And it was just out of chance that at that time I was offered a position. It was again in Austria, so I stayed for the postdoc position in Austria at the Institute of Science and Technology. And this was a newly funded research institution, and for me, also in retrospect, it was a fantastic opportunity to join. It was a very international environment. It was just growing up. People were very communicative. I could exactly do what I always wanted to do to transfer knowledge and education that I had from a physics background into problems of cell and developmental biology. At that time, I was studying cell and tissue mechanics, how cells can transform into motile states, and this is also something we continue in our lab. So we have an interdisciplinary research branch between integrating different fields of physics, biology, chemistry, and engineering to tackle these questions from multiple perspectives. So although I did not move so much in my career, I still felt first of all, I got the opportunity to have this independent position, so it's doable to find something. I was always following my core interests, and I was definitely searching for labs, as Francesca mentioned. You should really feel like it's a good lab where you can develop, you can acquire the tasks that you want to have for the future. And I was lucky because I also had a good fellowships available, so this is also something you can take into account. If you have fellowships, they might provide you with more independence to pursue the ideas that you have from an early stage in your career on. So applying for those might be very interesting. So I spent most of the time for my PhD and also postdoctoral work in Austria, but still in science it's intrinsically that you need to move somehow. I moved between disciplines, but not only that, you have still to move between different labs. I was a visiting scientist in France for almost a year, where I was working at the Center of Immunology, combining different biophysical techniques to study cell signaling. You're intrinsically connected to people internationally because you need to move a lot due to conferences, meetings. This is still something I feel like I'm doing more or less on a daily basis. So I'm still very good at packaging and moving somewhere. So that's the experience that I had during my career. So I didn't move much, but I feel like the importance is that you find a route or a way where you can really develop personally. And I can definitely recommend as well choosing good labs and choosing labs where you can really follow projects that are also your passion, something you would really like to do, and that also keeps you going and can give you a future perspective in science.
Thank you, Verena. It's really interesting to hear your different experiences, but the sort of commonality being driven by just the best labs and the best science, and whether that takes you internationally or not is the current theme. I have to pause before we move on to Amanda. I forgot we need to ask a poll question to people listening so that we have an idea of who you are, you're listening, and so we can sort of focus towards that. So can we raise the poll question quickly, Emma? It's everybody who's listening, can you please click on which stage of your research career you're at? That should come up in a moment.
Sorry, we're having a little bit of trouble with the poll. Can we move on to the next speaker and come back?
Okay, the poll will come up. So in the meantime, you can think about which stage of your research careers you're at while Amanda's speaking. So over to Amanda, who is a Royal Society Dorothy Hodgkin Research Fellow at the Department of Physiology, Development and Neuroscience at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Over to you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you today, and also to hear the other panelists speak about their career development. So a little bit about my career development. I did my PhD at the University of Adelaide in Australia, looking at the hormonal control of growth, and I completed that in 2007. But that project was largely basic physiology, looking at how the fetus, how the mother and the fetus might regulate the allocation of nutrients at the level of the placenta. But I knew that I needed to go more in depth into understanding how that was controlled, so to gain molecular skills and also skills in employing genetic modifications at the whole body physiological level to sort of explain the physiological things that I was seeing. So I applied for a fellowship that's called a CJ Martin Fellowship from the Australian government, which is a 4-year fellowship. The whole idea was 2 years abroad and then 2 years back in Australia. So I applied and was successful, and applied to undertake that at the University of Cambridge. And that was a big move from Australia to the UK, and 2 years really isn't very long. Within the first year, I quickly realised that I was being quite ambitious for what I thought I could achieve within those 2 years, and decided that in order to maximise the research opportunities available to me, I should maximise my time abroad. And in that time, I also met my now husband. So I looked for opportunities to stay abroad, and I've got 2 passports, which is very helpful because I could apply for local funding opportunities, British funding opportunities, and managed to secure a 3-year fellowship from a local charity called the Centre for Trophoblast Research, which is like an institute within the University of Cambridge. And I got that in 2011. But that meant that I had to give up the latter 2 years of funding in Australia, which was quite a big step because funding everywhere is tight. And yeah, that was quite a big decision to make. I then came towards the halfway through my fellowship, thinking about the next phase, and I could really feel that my research was ramping up. The independent research avenue that I was driving was moving really rapidly forward, and I could see a big gap in knowledge that I could address using some of the genetic tools that I developed and combining that with the in vivo physiology. And then I applied for a Dorothy Hodgkin Fellowship from the Royal Society to continue that research. So I suppose thinking back to why I chose Cambridge, I was very strategic. I knew that in order to undertake the research I wanted to do, it was the best place in the world, specifically for my research area, but more generally as an opportunity to interact with people from different research disciplines and to gain a feeling for how they undertook their research and maybe even identify collaborative opportunities. I also felt that by being close to Europe, I would be able to more easily engage with researchers in multiple research institutes around Europe, which is a much more difficult task when you're on the other side of the world in Australia. I also have family in Italy, which made me feel that if I needed family, I could go on a short plane ride to Italy to visit them, because moving from Australia to the UK on my own was quite a big challenge. So I've been here now for 9 years. I only plan to be here for 2 years. And whilst it might seem like it was a smooth career path, there were definitely lots of ups and downs and lots of challenges, which I'm sure the other panelists have also experienced themselves. So I suppose thinking about that, well, I mean, yeah, I managed to secure funds for my salary, publish research papers, but there were a lot of failures and unsuccessful experiences along the way. So, for instance, the first fellowship I applied for, I didn't get it the first year I applied. I managed to get close, but I didn't get it. And I've also had lots of paper rejections from scientific journals, and I haven't managed to get all of the grants that I've applied for. But in saying that, each time I have been unsuccessful, I've tried my best to pick myself up and make myself stronger, learn from that, and it's made me even more determined. So I think the challenges of moving abroad and having knockbacks have made me to be a better scientist. There have also been other pressures outside of the workplace, and particularly with moving away from Australia. I mean, I left my family and all the support networks I knew, which was very challenging straight after my PhD, to move abroad and think I need to run a lab. I don't know how things work in Cambridge. It's a very old university. The systems are very old. But Australia is very far, and even with the best of Skype and things like that, the time zone difference and the distance means that you can't just be there for the person or to be around people when you need them the most. Also, I'm now a mum, which means that I'm continually juggling to maintain both family life and my ambitions for a research career. And without immediate family support, that's been quite challenging. My other half is also not from the UK, from South Africa actually. So we've had to work very hard as a team and build support networks within our own workplaces, as well as through friends that we've made that are outside of work, which has been really important because, I mean, for instance, I became a mum at the same time as my husband bought his business. I commenced my fellowship and I agreed to take on 2 PhD students. So that was very challenging, but I wouldn't change anything. And I think I did choose well in the environment that I wanted to go to. So Cambridge is very international. There were many people that were in a similar situation to me that provided a lot of support and guidance, not only in the lab with getting things going, but also advice for family support, which means that you can share sitters, or someone can watch your kid when you're running into the lab to finish an experiment. So I was quite strategic in my moves to Cambridge for a professional point of view, but I think in a personal point of view, it was also very beneficial. Yeah, so that's me, but I'd be happy to talk more about my experiences and also hear about other experiences from those that are listening in as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists. It's really interesting. I appreciate you both being so honest and sort of sharing your personal experiences. And I think what Amanda says about it being, I think for early career scientists, you often look at the more senior, slightly more senior scientists, and it often looks like it was smooth sailing. And I think when you start talking to people, you realize very often it's not. And so we talk about, you know, these big international moves, and it looks all so well designed and so smooth, but I think in reality, very often it's not. And it's sometimes helpful to hear those stories. And I sometimes think sort of the mark of success in a scientist is how you get up after those knocks, which we all have. And I think it's good to hear others' experiences. So our poll is not working, so we will ask you later about your backgrounds. But the first question we have is, what advice would you give someone who's just moved to an unfamiliar country? So Amanda's talked a little bit about this already, but do you have specific advice to people who've just moved to an unfamiliar country?
So I suppose I had the advantage of moving to a country where English is the first language and my own language. I think there are other challenges where people move to an unfamiliar country that speaks also a different language, which is something very different. I suppose I pushed myself to join social groups outside of the department, which was really important to finding a balance between work and play. I deliberately chose to move into a place that had people that weren't local also living there in a sort of similar situation, and professional, but maybe and actually weren't in science. So that provided a good break, but also diversified the networks of friends that I managed to make. I researched quite a bit before about getting around and getting a bicycle and things like that, but yeah, I think you need to be prepared to put yourself out there. I think it's easier for others than others. And I think age also has a bit of play in that. I was lucky that I came on my own. I think when you've got a family, that can have its own challenges, but actually it opens other avenues, because then you meet parents at schools, at the school drop-off. So if you're open to that, people feed from that, and hopefully then you can build very good relationships and friendships that, in my case, have turned out to be surrogate families.
Thank you, Amanda. Do you have, and to the other two, Verena and Francesca, do you have some advice for people who've just moved to unfamiliar countries?
So actually, I totally agree with Amanda. I would comment, of course, when you speak to a country where an English-speaking country is always maybe easier. Germany was, of course, it was a challenge at the beginning for me, and but I have to say it's very international. Basically, I can do everything, sort out everything in English, even from my personal life. So I didn't have to really face the challenge to become fluent in I already speak 3 languages, so that would have been my 4th one, and it's also a difficult language to learn. So I didn't really learn it yet. At least I'm not fluent, but I think, yeah, basically what Amanda said is that the most important thing is really to, put yourself out and don't be shy, and try to get in contact with people, even beside your scientific community, of course, which is always easier, but also with people outside. And that's, for my personal experience, I have to say, I maybe did it more when I was younger. So I left when I was very young, and I found it, you know, when you move without family, and I was completely alone in France, I really did the maximum effort to meet people outside. And then little by little, when I started moving with my husband, with my partner, it was actually, we all, of course, we became older, so we also met friends outside of the lab, but we became also a little bit maybe lazier, or it was easier because it was the two of us. So it was a different type of interactions. So I think it changed, and actually that's also an interesting part to, you know, you go through different phases. But definitely, yeah, the best thing is try to really to integrate into the new culture. So, and I have to say, now our countries in Europe or in the US is not so exotic anymore. So we're pretty globalized. So you will find, I don't know, you know, same kind of brand or coffee places everywhere. So it's not. Yeah. So this is what I would add. How about you,
Verena? Do you have anything to add to that?
So I can fully agree with the other two, and I think it's also important to emphasize the joy that it brings along to move to a different country. So it's really also something people should take their time. You have to balance many things. It also happened to me when I moved now here to Spain half a year ago. I moved with my partner. I moved with a little kid. She's almost 2 now, and this is challenging. And also there are language barriers. I'm not speaking Spanish. I'm still on the beginner level, but it's really a joy entering scientifically a new institute, getting surrounded by new persons that you can exchange, and from it's an incredibly intense period of your life where you personally develop a lot and where you can also experience a lot. But really take your time, and I also know people, every person is a little bit different, I also feel, Some people want to integrate more immediately, some people want to focus on their work first, some people, so I think everybody has to find a path where he feels comfortable with, For me, it was very important to explore the city, the surrounding, I like the country, so I think everybody needs to find a way to balance off, but surely if you are somewhere and you want to balance such a job with family, partnership, it's important to get yourself organized. You need to organize lots of people. You're usually far away from your family that can come along very easily. So you need to get connected in a certain sense, but this might depend on the person who is moving, how this looks like in a specific case.
Great, thank you all. So we have a lot of questions coming in. Thank you for people who are posting the questions. So we have another question, which is, what factor would have made you decide not to move abroad, and what was the biggest struggle that you encountered in moving and in deciding to move? Does anyone want to jump in with that?
I think that's a difficult question, So for me, for example, it happened after my postdoc period, I applied for fellowships. I could go to the US, And it was a very difficult decision. Should I now move over to the US? I was at that time also applying for independent positions, and I was in the lucky situation, I have to mention, that I could choose between different paths. But still, it's a difficult decision, because you need to decide, am I ready for the independent career step? Should I do some more training or some more scientific experience abroad? Could you envision yourself moving to every country in the world? So this is maybe also a topic that would be interesting for me to discuss with the others. Are there limitations where you want to move? Did you consider, now apart from the scientific excellence of the institute, would you go to any country in the world? So this might be issues that could be limiting in the decisions people make.
I suppose I agree. I mean, I think the stage of your personal life really determines to what capacity you can move. I mean, I've got my kid and my husband to think about, and I would love actually to go and move abroad, to go to the States, to have a completely different experience. But I also realize that keeping my home environment happy is very important to me. If it's not happy at home, it's not going to be happy at work, and vice versa. So I think that there's a lot of things to consider, and I think you don't actually need to necessarily move abroad. You can move institutes or move disciplines, like Verena was talking about. And so there's different types of challenges that you can go through without actually physically having to leave a country. Yeah, and I think you need to balance those up and really consider those carefully about what your needs are. Each person's needs are going to be different to someone else's. I needed to feel that I had family that was close by as opposed to a 24-hour flight home. So knowing that I had family that was only an hour or two away in Italy gave me reassurance. Some people might need that family to be closer, or it's not as important. So this is where you sort of weigh up. I mean, I didn't want to strain myself to learn a new language. I thought that that would be too many things all at once. Whereas, I mean, to hear Francesca and Verena talk about how they've now moved to a country where they weren't familiar with that language as much is really admiring. And so I think you need to sort of search within yourself what you're able to adapt, what you're not willing to change, what is important to you, and the surrounding environment, whether it's your partner or family that might be dependent on you.
Yeah, I would just add, so addressing the point that a lot of the countries we've talked about have been sort of in Europe and the US. So I spent 3.5 years in Thailand as well, trying to do my research. And obviously that's quite differently, both linguistically and culturally. And that, again, came partly from trying to juggle my career and my husband's career. So I think sometimes we talk about the decisions. It would be great if we could all be driven only by science and only by the best lab in the world. And often the reality on the ground is that isn't possible. But I've come out of that sort of with a realization that with a bit of determination, you can find opportunities in places where you might not think they were there. So we have sort of the dream case scenario, but even in other places, you find opportunities you might not realize were there. So sometimes I think you just have to sort of jump and move to Thailand. And, things come along, and it also works as well. So the non-ideal situation. We have another question, which was, what was the biggest challenge that you faced in integrating to a new institute and country? So again, I think a lot of these things we're discussing are not only about countries, but also moving to new institutes. And how did you overcome them?
I suppose from my perspective, it's knowing who is the best person to give you help. I mean, it depends on whether you go as a postdoc and you have someone that is your boss and gives you, all right, you need to do this, you need to be ordering these reagents and speaking to these people. But if you move with a fellowship, which is what I did, was quite challenging, because then you don't have a boss to answer to. You don't actually know whether you're meeting sort of requirements that maybe you should be at your career stage. But that's where being proactive is really important, and certain personalities are better at that than others. I think that, yeah, finding out, because I mean, I've deliberately visited Cambridge before I moved here, so I knew I wanted to come here. So I was lucky in my PhD to be able to visit labs. And if you have the opportunity to do that before making a decision to move somewhere, visit the city, visit the institute, you can speak with people at a similar career stage to see whether they're also supported, even if they're on their own fellowship or whether they're a postdoc, because ultimately they're going to be your source of information. You want to be able to feel safe in the environment, in that you can find a house or a place that is close by, that it's safe to walk around at night, things like that. You need to get a nice feeling that you can live in that place, you can work in that environment that's all supportive. And I think you can really only judge that if you can physically visit. It's not going to be exactly the same, but you'll get a feeling for the place a lot more.
Yeah, actually, I can just maybe add, so I totally agree with what Amanda said, and of course, I think the best way is whatever stage of your career you are moving is to go and visit the lab, the institute, the city. I think the challenges, they change maybe a bit also depending the stage of your career. So which means, I mean, if you're moving for your PhD or for your postdoc, you will have different challenges when if you're moving abroad to another institute with maybe a different languages just to set up your lab. Because when you are becoming a PI, I mean, there is also immediately more the management part or the administrative burden that maybe you don't have when you are simply like a student or a postdoc in a lab. So these are maybe extra challenges that are maybe not forcibly dependent on or not always like more or less difficult depending on the country, but it's in general because it's the next step of your career. So you're facing different challenges. At least that's what I personally experienced. I don't think that it would have been more or less challenging in other countries maybe. Or at least I cannot judge because I only started my lab here for the first time. So, and then of course the best is just to overcome this burden, and the challenges is to look for advice, support inside your institute. And if there are like infrastructure set up in place, basically that can help you with this, at least for the administrative part, not only not the science, which I mean we are used to basically.
Great. So thanks to everyone who's sending in the questions. Please do keep sending them in. It's great to have some people actively involved. So we have another question, which I think is quite interesting and pertinent to people perhaps who have a taste for travel, which is how accommodative are institute directors to the idea of young PIs moving frequently? So once you get to the PI position, sort of, is that the point where you stay put, or is there opportunity for travel at that point? Anybody want to jump in and comment on that?
I mean, I suppose I'm trying to work out whether they want to know whether the institute is happy to receive, because I mean, I think in order to receive, you need to have your own fellowship, and I think most institutes would be very happy to take on board researchers, especially if they've come from a different department or a different institute or a different university abroad. If it's at a different type of level, for say to accept a postdoc that has done their PhD in a different lab, I think that is also very well appreciated by lab heads.
I think the question is more about PIs. So once people start their group, if they move frequently at that point, and I guess there are challenges with that.
I'm not sure if I get the question. So is it related to that you travel a lot as a PI?
No, I think it's moving frequently. So I think
once you
start your group, people can then move.
I think this depends very much on the institutes. There are more and more institutes where you will not get a permanent position, or even more where you have limited contracts. So the institutes are more or less expecting that you are getting another position at a certain point, and their reputation from the institute also depends on which kind of position you will receive afterwards. So I would say it depends on the institute, but it's more and more common that once you have your first PI position, you will have to move again. This is at least my experience that I have right now.
Mine too. I think it depends. I mean, it depends the type of institute where you decide to go, but this is normally clear from the beginning, basically.
I suppose even in my perspective, getting if you've got a fellowship doesn't mean that you're ushered into a permanent position. The only downside I find with the lack of security for career, lack of security in terms of your position, is that moving yourself and your family is one thing, but if you're trying to build a group, it's also the expectation that your group members are willing to move, which is hard if you want to take on PhD students. Well, because you need to be there for them for that duration, and it's much more difficult for them to move in their PhD to another institute, and then they lose their supervisor. So I think it's quite a big consideration that needs to be timed well with respect to the members in your lab. My understanding is of those that have been in labs where the PI has moved. There's been a big chunk that have moved with them and others that have stayed behind, but then they've been out of a job, or they've been able to have their job for a little bit of an overlap while the new PI transitions. But I think it's a big consideration to make. I think it's definitely, as the other guys mentioned, it's quite a common thing. It's really hard to secure a permanent position. But yeah, it's something that you need to think quite carefully about, and speaking to others for advice that have gone through something similar is really, really helpful.
I would just add that in my experience, there's always going to be a lag time. So every move, you will lose 6 months or so, maybe even longer at the beginning. And so the downside of frequent moves, you have to factor that in. I mean, however enthusiastic and energetic you are, there will be a lag time where you don't know how to buy things, your PCR machine hasn't showed up, whatever it is. So that's just something I would factor in. So I have a question, which is, how do you balance, so this isn't strictly about moving, but I think it's kind of in the topic, which is, how do you balance science, administrative work, writing grants, and family? Is being an independent researcher overwhelming?
This is not really related forcefully to mobility. I mean, I think it's like what you have to, to do to be successful in our job. So, yeah, I think it's good to be well organized and to good management skills, basically, and to kind of, yeah, I guess be focused and maybe you need to organize yourself also outside of your personal, to have some help also outside of the lab to help also in the management of the personal life, of the family life. And then in terms of writing grants, this is basically what we have to do on a regular basis. So it's part of our
That is true. This is an absolutely challenging topic, yeah. To balance, especially maybe as a female, to balance science with family, you soon feel that either part is shortcut at a certain point. So I think it might be important to really realize that maybe not every issue is equally prioritized every day. So not everything is equally important every day, and you really need to set a good organization and also learn when it is important to do what. So I think it's possible to do, but it's a challenge.
I think the thing that I've really learned very quickly is to decide what is important and what's not. And it's important to keep family life happy. It's important to keep the people in the lab happy. But it's also important that I'm happy as well. So to get all of that achieved, you need to have the right people at home that support you when you have that crazy moment and you've spent lots of time on a grant and it doesn't come through. Or if you need to work extra long hours and you've got the right people in the lab that you can trust that can take the work. But it is a continual juggle, a juggling act to balance your time. I think you become more efficient at what you do. I don't know if the others felt that as you learn quickly what you need to spend more time on, what you can let go as it is, and not be the perfectionist on that item, to balance up where you really invest your energy. And what will be most important for your career as well as for your personal life when you need to take a time off to support your partner when they've supported you as well. So
I have a question which somebody sent in, which I think is quite interesting, which is, do you think the pressure to be mobile affects diversity in the scientific workplace?
I think
you get a self-selecting.
So you mean diversity in terms of gender, or
diversity, and also the kinds of people who might be willing to move. So the sort of pressure to move might prevent certain people from pursuing a scientific career if they feel that they're not unable to progress without moving and they're unwilling to move for whatever reason.
So in general, I would feel like it affects males and females equally, because usually you have a partner, and also even if a man wants to move, you have a female who has maybe a certain job that she cannot do everywhere, yeah, and vice versa. So I think gender is almost equally influenced. Maybe I think finance might be a certain aspect. So if you are not able to invest also a certain amount of money to on whatever level, PhD, postdoc, or even BI, this is also very limiting in pursuing these steps, at least in my opinion.
I mean, I suppose it's really interesting because, I mean, you tend to meet people that are in a similar, that have also moved. But in saying that, I've met a lot of people that haven't moved and have also managed to be very successful, even more successful. And I think those that don't move become even more determined, and they seek out more opportunities, perhaps, than you might if you moved away, because you've had other things happen. So I think that, yeah, I do think it takes a certain personality trait to push yourself to move abroad. And I mean, some people it might be just for 2 years, others it might be to country to country to country, others it might be in one place for a long time. But I mean, I already know I've been here for 9 years, and people say you've been here too long. So, but why move if you're in a great place? And I think as long as if you can justify, and always still seek out opportunities to further yourself and your research, I think then, yeah, you should be proud of those efforts and use that as leverage as well.
There's no one size fits all in science.
Nice.
So we've got time for one last question, which is, when you made this step in your career, did you apply for postdocs, grants, PI positions in multiple countries, or did you focus your search within one or a few specific countries, and why?
So I think this is very, I mean, I think it's pretty personal. I briefly shared my experience when I was, when I introduced myself. So at the time of basically of the postdoc, I was mostly focusing, I chose that I wanted to do an experience in the US, basically. So it was like a decision, and I focused my search. And then at the time of when I was looking for an independent position for the PI position, as I said before, because of personal reason and the fact of both families, my husband is French, I'm Italian, we wanted to come closer home. And so I focused my search in Europe. I also considered a bit the US, but so it was a kind of combining also maybe the personal aspects, with personal life with the with again looking for very good scientific places. So I think here there is no really an advice. It's very personal. It depends what is your basic personal decision, and if you want to be focused or not. I think maybe in the early stage after my PhD in France, so already in Europe, I thought that I wanted to have an experience in the US. But again, maybe it's not mandatory. So I think this is a personal decision.
I mean, I knew I wanted to move abroad. Australia is very isolated, and whilst the science it can be exceptional, I knew that I was disconnected from a lot of meetings that I could attend, researchers that I could be interacting with in a much more fluid environment. So I was quite strategic in choosing Europe. So I did look there, but in saying that, as I mentioned earlier, I did visit quite a number of labs before, different institutes. So I based my decision not only on what I knew about the science coming out of the institute and the people that work there, but also my feeling for the place. I think though it's so competitive, and if you're looking for a postdoc, I think apply for as many things as you can if you're willing to go to those countries, and hopefully you should and you will gain from that experience. If it's for a more senior sort of position, then maybe you want to be a bit more specialized in where you go, that will build you more into your career path if you know where you're heading in terms of research.
Great, well I think we're going to have to actually wrap it up there. So thank you so much to all the panelists. It's been really interesting and enjoyable hearing your perspectives. So the panelists have all agreed to be around for the next hour on Twitter. So if everybody could move your questions now over to Twitter. So I think the handle is posted on your screen. So everybody will be around for an hour, so please we'll continue the discussion there. So thank you for everyone for joining in and for being involved with all the questions, and thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your experiences today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.